I'm excited to introduce our speakers from Arkatechture. Luke Ratliff is the Training and Enablement Manager, and Katie Eagan, our Chief Operating Officer of Arkatechture. Today, they'll be exploring the future of data-driven decision-making with a focus on two powerful approaches for accessing credit union insight. So with that, I will turn it over to Luke and Katie to get started. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us today. As she just said, I'm Katie Eagan, the COO here at Arkatechture. I started at Arkatechture 10 years ago now as a data visualization analyst. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And Luke is our training and enablement manager. So he helps all of our customers here at Arkatechture better understand and leverage the tools that they have access to make sense of their data and share those knowledge and learnings throughout their organizations. Today, we're going to be touching on a controversial topic and answering maybe a clickbait question. We'll learn more, but our dashboard's dead. So we'll talk about that sort of existential question. Our dashboard's dead. We'll, not to spoil it, but we'll talk about why dashboards still matter, how dashboard development is changing in today's landscape. Luke will share some examples of natural language and generative AI and the use cases that he's worked with some of our credit unions on, as well as the importance of building trust in both paradigms and some real world examples and strategies. So we're hoping by the end of this discussion today, you have better understanding or some ideas around the value and where to use a dashboard and when, but then also where to use natural language and generative AI and when, and some concepts that might be helpful to bring to your credit union. So let's start at looking at the origin of this question, are dashboards dead? Taylor Brownlow wrote an article way back in 2020 now, which is 5 years ago, which is pretty crazy. And it was titled, Are Dashboards Red? And so a pretty controversial question at the time. And she talks about how dashboards were the primary weapon of distributing data, but they aren't the end of the data visualization story. And she talks about how democratization of data needs sort of a different way to communicate and a different tool. And so in the article, she covers kind of a series of 5 points. So the first one is that dashboards are often built and abandoned. I think a lot of people on this call can probably relate to that, especially if you're a dashboard builder. I know I have built a lot of dashboards and spent a lot of time and heart on building tools that maybe get used for a little bit, but then get abandoned or forgotten about. So that's one of the points that she makes in arguing that dashboards are dead. Another is that they don't actually deliver insights. And so I think where the origin of that comes from is that they deliver data, but they don't necessarily tell you what to do with that data or why the data is saying a certain thing. She argues that they're built for the creator, not the consumer, which I think to her point there just sort of depends who the creator and the consumer are. If they're working closely together, I'd counter her argument that they can be for both. Modern users want search, not slices. So I think this is something we've seen, and Luke's going to talk more about in terms of the modernization of data visualization tools and how that's changed. But modern users definitely do want to be able to interact with their data, ask questions, and not just be able to slice and dice the data. They're looking for a little bit more of an enriched experience when they're interacting with data. And the last is that data discovery is replacing static monitoring. So those are the 5 arguments that she sort of lays out in that article, Are Dashboards Dead? And she followed it up 3 years later with another article. And she sort of clarifies one of her points. So in the article, she said, of course, she never expected the original article that she had written to gain as many views or start as many conversations as she has. But one of the quotes that really stuck out to me in the follow-up article was, she says, the point I was trying to make is that dashboards have always been good for one thing, quickly displaying numbers, but we've been misusing them by expecting them to do everything for us. We've asked them to tell stories, be visually appealing, convey information quickly, act as a data portal, and do anything else we could think of. Of course, they couldn't do all of that. And as someone who started in data visualization 10 years ago when Tableau, I think Tableau was founded 25 years ago, but that was the tool that I learned about data visualization on. I can relate to all of these things that she explains, and it was those data visualization tools, as they became available, were one of the first ways that you could share and spread information. And you could make a dashboard be all of these different things or try to do all of these things. We can talk about data storytelling. We can talk about how you can use it to create a self-service dashboard. You can use it to create a knowledge base. Like, there are all sorts of different things that you can do. But as technology has evolved, and again, Luke's going to talk more about this, we have new tools that are able to do some of these things better than dashboards originally could. So all of that leads us to this next topic, which is why dashboards still matter. So the first major point that this is in her article as well, Taylor Brownlow, the first thing that dashboards do well is that they can serve as alignment tools. And I think this is one of my favorite, has always been one of my favorite use cases for dashboards, which is that they're a starting place. And oftentimes when you're talking with a business stakeholder about data insights that they're looking to get, they might have 5 metrics that they want to see. And then when you start to drill down and ask what the definitions of those metrics are, and you start to broaden the group maybe of people that you're building the dashboard with, everyone might have a different definition. So the one that always gets a lot of chatter in the credit union space is number of members. Each department has their own definition for what a member is or how many members there are at the credit union. And so when you put a number on a dashboard, when you start to surface up that information, that's what it is. It's a starting point. And so that can help you, your business stakeholder, or the organization more broadly, help to agree on the definitions of those members. You can talk about the different ways that you're looking to see that information. So one of the things that we always say at Arkatechture is when you build a good dashboard, oftentimes no one's going to give you a standing ovation. They're going to say, well, wait, what about this other thing that I didn't think about? But when I see it out in front of me, that's how I'm realizing that I have a question about something different that's not on the screen to start. So those are kind of some of the things that we've seen in our experience in terms of using dashboards as alignment tools. The last is talking about good performance. Sometimes I think different people might have different expectations of how they would expect a dashboard to perform or what they might be able to click into or slice or dice the data. And I think that kind of goes to the interactivity that we expect of dashboards, but it's not until an end user can see something, click into it, play around with it, that they start to explore some other features that they might want to see on the dashboard. The next example where dashboards continue to shine, and I have reviewed this deck with Luke a couple of times now, and each time I've said it, but this to me is the most important use for dashboards still. And so the dashboards enable repeatable monitoring. And so when it comes to looking for a consistent shared starting point, dashboards are always going to be better than an empty text box on an NLP tool that says, how can I help you today? Because if you're always going to know you're getting the exact data that you'd expect with the filters, with the definitions, all of those things. And so if you're someone who needs to monitor metrics, if you're the VP of a branch and you need to know how your branch is performing every day, you just want a reliable dashboard that you can look at and see the number of loans that you've opened, and see how your branch is performing and trust and know that definition is correct. So to me, this is one of I think the most important uses of dashboards today, and it will continue to still be one of the key uses. So the last is dashboards support data literacy and trust. This is something that we keep hearing more and more. So data literacy, data governance, data stewardship, these have all been important kind of talking points, but also grounded practices within organizations. Dashboards can help to build data literacy when they include things like clear definitions, context for trends, links to underlying tables. They can serve as tools to help teach and expand and grow the number of people within an organization that understand where that data is coming from. And the more people that know and understand the origin of the data, the more people have kind of that common language to understand that they're sharing the same information when they are. So you don't end up in a situation where 2 people are arguing about something about one person's number being right and one person's number being wrong, and then they discover they're using two sources of truth. The more you can sort of harness those definitions and point people in a direction of this is a source of truth for this is a source of truth for this, it can help build that trust and common understanding of that data literacy within your organization. So making sure that transparency for where the data is coming from is well known across the organization can be the key in helping build that trust. This one's one of my favorite examples. So dashboards are the gateway to deeper exploration. We talked a little bit about this earlier in terms of it is helpful to sometimes see something. But when we talk about exploring the data, an example or kind of like in practice, if you think about a student asking a question, so in this case, us asking ChatGPT for an answer, the teacher can give you the answer to that question, or ChatGPT can offer a suggestion or a solution, but sometimes only researching will help you learn unexpected other discoveries as well. So the same can be said for dashboards. When you use a dashboard to perform your own analysis rather than just saying something, you might end up on a side quest that would teach you something new about what you were originally setting out to look for in the first place. So sometimes those unexpected discoveries can be as important, if not more important, than where you started out. And it's possible to do some of that discovery and exploration through ChatGPT or a different NLP tool, but sometimes just digging into the data through a dashboard or the underlying SQL can be really important too. So kind of to conclude this first part, we often talk about tools and technologies, about either or. In this case, the argument that Taylor Brownlow, Luke, and I are all sort of aligned on is that it's really more of a both and scenario in terms of what's the role of dashboards now, going forward, in the past, where does NLP come in? We are really seeing that dashboards for recurring visibility and trust are remaining really critical to data-driven organizations. And those natural language tools are really helpful in that more ad hoc discovery or deeper exploration, especially in users that are not data people as a first, part of their job, right? For folks that are within the organization, but don't know how to query SQL or don't know how to build Tableau dashboards or don't know how to use Power BI, being able to ask a simple question of data and know and trust the answer through that NLP tool can be really critical. So dashboards are evolving with us, and as is NLP. Luke's going to talk next about how dashboard development is changing in this new landscape.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Appreciate that. All right, so being that we are all gathered here today to decide whether or not dashboards are dead, I think it would not be fair to have that conversation without first examining the life of dashboards and dashboard development. That will help us, come to the conclusion of where we are headed with this journey. And I think this picture is a great place to start with that because should be really, really relevant and resonate with people, these cavemen inventing wheels. Because whether it's, a dashboard or an AI or a new tool, whatever it may be, I think it's really, really common for people to say, I have this efficiency gain that I found or could, implement into our current workflow. And someone else says, sounds cool, but frankly, we just don't have the time, the resources to implement it. Um, the bigger sort of benevolent overlord would be able to say, yeah, that would be worth it. You should do that. You should adopt that. That will save you 1,000 hours next year. But it's really hard in the moment to actually, take action to adopt those things. So with all of these cool sort of new developments and features that I'll walk through as we talk about the history of dashboarding, I think this is really important to keep in front of mind to say, at least for a while anyway, dashboards are very much around, partly because of this, because it's really hard to actually implement and adopt new features. Um, I want to start by thinking about how dashboard development has and will change, and then we'll look at it more from a viewer perspective. And all of these examples are Tableau focused, but you could pick any BI tool you want, and you're going to find a very similar timeline. It's kind of been an arms race with each other of deciding or trying to sort of add new features, and compete with each other that way. But dating, way back to 2003, right? This was Tableau's sort of big idea was the VizQL to say, not everyone can write SQL, for example, not everybody can query their database. What if we could just drag and drop? That would be pretty awesome. That would be easy. And that is, Tableau, Power BI, that is kind of the format that we are familiar with, that we know today for these BI dashboarding tools, is to say I can just drag this field onto rows and I have something on my table or on my bar chart or whatever it is. So that was kind of the start of sort of this superpower, supercharging of developers. In 2005, there was the Show Me toolbar introduced. That's still there today. So if you've used Tableau, you'll recognize that. And this was another effort to say, not everybody knows what is the best chart for the right use case. So another tool in the developer's arsenal to help them build more efficiently, more quickly, et cetera. Because now with the Show Me toolbar, people could say, I have these data sets. This is my measure. This is my dimension. What should I build? I have no idea. Should that be a bar chart, a line chart, pie chart? Probably not that one, but maybe. Um, and in that case, Show Me toolbar would say, this is what I recommend. Click on it. Here's your bar chart. Here's your line chart. So again, as a way to supercharge these developments to be quicker, more efficient, more scalable, etc. In 2010, they introduced data blending. So this was a way we could say, okay, I have multiple data sets. I don't really know how to do joins in SQL. I don't want to combine them on the back end. Now in Tableau or in 2010, we can actually say, let's combine these two data sets, and the way that I'm going to join is by clicking on a little chain icon, and that's gonna link them together magically. So that kind of innovation, again, just further accelerating the ability to create dashboards. Jump up to 2019, they introduced Ask Data. So this is natural language queries, right? Early on in this sort of adventure of AI that we're on. But here you could truly start to say, this is my question, natural language, ask your data, give me an answer based on what you see in the data set. This is accelerated. Ask Data actually currently doesn't exist anymore. That has changed to Tableau Pulse, I think is what they call it now. But now there's things like Tableau Agent, which are even more advanced, by far than 2019. And now, reduces barrier to entry, works alongside the analyst, helps uncover, whatever insights you're trying to harbor from the data. And this takes it to the next step to say, not only do I want help deciding what kind of chart to build, but now I could say, I'll write a paragraph. I need a chart that does this, that, and this. I need year-over-year calculation. Build it for me, and it will just do it. So again, maybe the final step in the evolution of supercharging developers to build really, really efficiently, really, really quickly. So I think where we're seeing this change in the next year, and maybe it has already started to change, is that let's say for the previous 2-ish years since tools like ChatGPT became really readily used by folks, I think a lot of developers, myself included, are using these tools really as an assistant. And by that, I mean, I'm still building the dashboard pretty much all by myself, but there's going to be a calculated field, level of detail, month over month, these sneaky things that always take longer than they should. And I'm going to ask ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot or whatever it is, I'm going to ask them for help on this one specific thing. And so it kind of is this piecemeal help that we're getting along the way, which, is certainly really helpful and certainly accelerates the development process. It's still piecemeal, right? It's not like a whole design me this dashboard and build it. Where I think this is changing and where it has begun to change is on the next slide. Now, instead of saying, help me with this calculated field to get, LTV ratio or year-over-year loan growth or year-over-year member growth, whatever it is. Now you might say, create a KPI trending dashboard that includes the following 10 metrics, and it's just going to do it for you. That's still early stages, but that is coming. That is in some cases here. And all this to say, these technology companies have very intentionally positioned themselves, these BI tools, to build more dashboards, rapidly, to have a massive sort of quantity of dashboards available to folks. So this is where we're kind of at an inflection point where developers can build really very, very quickly, where a dashboard maybe 10 years ago would have taken, let's just say 35 hours start to finish. Now we might see it take, five or fewer hours. So that's more on the development side, and we'll circle back to that. But I think we also have to talk about how these BI tools are positioning themselves to develop for end users, for viewers. So this is sort of features, and again, focused on Tableau, but you can picture this for every single BI tool. My argument here, and I truly believe this, is that over time, these tools are positioning themselves to be more and more and more interactive to the end user. And if you think about what a dashboard is or should be, that is kind of the essence of it. Because of course we've had, print out reports for a long, long time, static reports, maybe a table, maybe a bar chart. that you can't really interact with. It says one thing, it tells one story, and that's it. I think one of the reasons that Power BI, Tableau, etc., are so popular is because you have the ability to do things like click on this bar and then everything else will change with it, right? These filter actions that allow for way more end user experience. And so I think in many ways, these BI companies are positioning themselves to be more and more interactive, sort of user friendly on that end. And just a couple highlights here. Starting off with quick filters in 2006, transition in '09 to active dashboards in Tableau, and that's kind of what I'm referring to with filter actions. You could click here, it's going to change over here. Parameter controls, that's a huge one. Now with parameters, right, you can say, I want my end user to be able to say, what if analyses, what if questions. So we could have a parameter that has, let's say, an interest rate slider on it, and you could have a bar chart or a dashboard that's going to change dynamically when your end user slides that interest rate from 1% to 10%, just to get this what if analysis of what would change if we change this. Parameters allow for so much end user interactivity. Of course, ask data, I mentioned that in the last slide, but this applies to end users as well. Allows for folks to ask in natural language, tell me about what's going on with the data. And then finally, more and more of these companies are doubling down on AI. So now you have things like Pulse, Tableau GPT, Tableau Sketch, which is basically you can say, I want, in a line chart, I want a particular line that has this format. So it's going to go up for a little bit and then down and then back up. So find lines in my data set that mimic that sort of trajectory over time. And it will do it. It'll filter on that with a fuzzy match. So again, just massive end user interactivity. And I think when you look at this, or at least when I look at this, I'm tempted to say, dating back to '06, we're sort of funneling ourselves to sort of this all roads lead to Rome, or all roads lead to natural language queries. And I think an argument could be made, and certainly has been made by people, to say we're just going to end up in a world where there's no more dashboards. All it is maximum user interactivity. Because that is sort of where we've been headed. How can we make this as interactive as possible for folks? So, based on what you see with that timeline, I think it's a really fair argument that we're headed to a place where what's the most possible interactive thing? It's probably just a chatbot, right? The end user has a chatbot, they can ask questions of their data, and that's where it ends. But, and there is a but here, I think whether or not we get there, and certainly some folks will get there. I mean, I've worked with a couple CUs who say, we don't want any dashboards at all. All we want is an agent we can talk to. Despite that, there's many reasons to still include visualizations, dashboards. Katie mentioned several at the beginning. One, we grew up learning pictures speak louder than words. Human brain processes images 60,000 times faster than text. 90% of information transmitted to the brain is visual. There's all kind of statistics around learning and sort of knowledge sticking, that when you see something visually versus hear it or read text, you're so much more likely to retain that information. So whatever the chatbot ends up spitting out, and eventually that may be, pictures, charts, etc. It's still really crucial and important to understand that we got here for a reason. We started building dashboards for a reason, to get away from, Excel reports, etc. And that's because somewhere along the line, somebody realized that, yeah, we can picture things visually much better. As an example, if you're presented with this table and you said, count the nines, I'll give you, 5 or 10 seconds to try and do that. It's going to take a while, right? We can sort of go through one row at a time, look for nines. I'm picking out a few, but it's going to take a long time. It's not easy. It is not very efficient. Versus a very simple addition like this next slide. Let's just make a highlight table. Let's make the nines red. So it's not exactly a visualization, but we are using principles, adding color, etc. And now the nines really stick out. And now I could very quickly say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So with that kind of visualization, we're able to get so much more powerful of an insight. And so that is one of the reasons why, dashboarding and visualizations are certainly not dead, because it allows for such easier transmission of knowledge. Along with that, right, everything Katie mentioned, I completely agree with. Pictures speak louder than words. Dashboards are alignment tools. Repeat monitoring is huge. Like Katie said, if your morning routine is either, scenario A, morning routine, you open up a Power BI dashboard and you look at a particular, set of metrics, that was the same as yesterday, and you can compare that to yesterday, you know for certain that you're looking at those same metrics. Scenario B, I open up, 9 a.m., open up my computer, ask my chatbot, how were transactions trending yesterday? Um, maybe I asked it slightly differently, forgot my coffee this morning, forgot a few keywords, and now it's going to have a slightly different output potentially. So that kind of repeat monitoring becomes really, really hard. So that's a huge one. Data literacy and trust, you sometimes don't know what question to ask. So by having a dashboard, it sort of helps you understand and get into the world of data if you're less technical. And in the same way, like Katie mentioned, gateway to deeper exploration. Sometimes you have to just sit with a problem, try and troubleshoot yourself, and dashboards allow for that. So I think where we're headed, and I think multiple organizations, whether you're a consumer of data or you are someone who is like Power BI, making a BI tool, I think we're going to see several different approaches in the next 5 years to how people want to navigate this. But where I'd like to see, myself and folks who I'm invested in position themselves would be to have this combination, this equation of a collaboration between human input and automation and AI. And so what that would look like, for example, would be for sure, I don't want to build this Tableau desktop or this Tableau dashboard, from scratch without any help. Why would I do that at this point when there's so much help from these tools? But also, I don't really want to just have a chatbot that has no other sort of human input, human engagement. And so I think it's going to be finding that line for all of us between accepting the help, from not our AI overlords, but assistants, because that's really what they are, accepting that help and then building more efficiently. Okay, so I really do believe that we're in an age where pretty much everybody can be a data superhero. I think that you can build things that wouldn't have even been imaginable, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. As an example, I am very, very basic, rudimentary at Python. Spend most of my time, most of my day in SQL. But Snowflake, which is our database that we use, they have these things called Streamlit apps, and Katie knows I'm obsessed with Streamlit apps. Um, and with AI tools, I can build a Streamlit app that's pretty powerful, pretty intense in truly 10 minutes. So, that would have taken a developer who knows Python front ways and back. That might have taken them, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days prior. And now someone with very basic Python skills can do it in 10 minutes. And so that's everybody, right? That's dashboard building. That's anything in this data world that we live in. It's going to be and has become so easy to be sort of a super developer. And I think a lot of folks label themselves as either technical or non-technical. And I really take issue to that for multiple reasons, but one being I think that limits us professionally. Oh, I'm non-technical, I can't do this task, I can't fill this role. But I also think it limits, your organization and your ceiling of what you can accomplish. Because I think now we all have all the tools at our fingertips to be super technical, to do really sort of advanced things. And it's just a matter of actually using those tools. I think the next frontier, ironically for us, because there's so much development around sort of advancing these super technologies, but I think ironically, our next frontier as humans has to actually go back to the basics of data quality, data accessibility, data governance, etc. So we'll start with data quality here. When it comes to building trust, data quality of inputs is critical. And so this applies to pretty much everything in this space, whether you're building a dashboard, whether you're sharing insights with somebody, whether you're using an AI tool, the inputs they're crucial. I mean, that's setting the context. You need to have a good context that's true. Cost of poor data quality is just massive. So this is a number, average cost of poor data quality obviously varies organization to organization and industry to industry. But, this particular study found that could be up to, 12.9 million, which is just kind of massive, massive number. And that's more of the quantitative, sort of costs in play. But there's also lots and lots of qualitative costs that are maybe less tangible, but very, very real. Erosion in trust, that's one. If somebody looks at a dashboard or a report or something and it's wrong, you might say, okay, well, that product is busted. I can't trust it anymore. I'm going to go back to my favorite Excel sheet because I trust that. That's one. That's a big one. Loss in productivity. That's another one, right? If I'm recreating by hand this spreadsheet, once a month, once a quarter, once a week, that might be, I worked with somebody who had to do a specific report that was once a month, and it took her 40 hours to create the report by hand. So that's a quarter of her time of her working life was spent making this manual report, which when we put it in Tableau, that became fully automated. So that kind of productivity gain is just massive and really, really hard to overstate. Inaccurate reporting, right? If we don't have solid quality data on the back end, it's going to be inaccurate when we go to make these reports. Regulatory risk, compliance risk, etc. If we are wrong, especially in this industry, we kind of can't afford to be wrong with certain things. So that just exposes you to certain regulatory risks, of course. And then, of course, just sort of poor business performance is another one, and that sort of encapsulates everything else. So these costs are both tangible and non-tangible, but having solid data quality is just massive. And this picture here is our data quality rules engine that for anybody who's sort of seen our product or worked with us knows that it's a cornerstone of what we think about, which is to say, we have all these pretty dashboards, we have these beacon, these standardized data model views that we make, but none of it matters if the data coming in is bad. So our primary focus is actually not to, let's say, build in, 600 lines of code at the conformance layer that are going to fix all the, poor data coming in, but actually rather to say, let's expose it at the beginning, right as it comes into Snowflake, let's expose it. So that way we can say, how can I clean this up? A classic example here was we worked with a credit union who had something like 65 states when they worked with us. And we said, why might that be? And when we sort of traced that back, we were finding that their input method for state was open response. You can type in whatever state you want. So we were seeing, multiple different versions of the same state. So we said, okay, how can we change that? Again, not by writing this case statement in SQL to say, if Alabama spelt with two A's, then Alabama. We don't need to do that in SQL. Let's instead go back to the source and change it to say, let's not make it open-ended, but let's make it a drop-down. So they did that, and then that error was cleaned up. So that kind of thing is really, really crucial for, whatever you want to talk about, whether it's just a really solid dashboard, data consistency in a data model. If you're not too afraid to talk about AI and you want to do that, for all of it, you need to have solid data quality. So that's one of the, things on the forefront for us, is to think about that. So more tangibly here, high risk of data quality issues, sort of from a focus. On the left-hand side, we've got scenarios that we've seen. One of our employees received a direct mail offer to open a children's card for their parents to set up 20 years after opening their membership, right? So these are the kind of things, especially when working with CUs. So many people are choosing credit unions because they know you, they can work with you, they have relationships with you. And that's a massive, massive value add that you have over these big banks who don't, you're just totally a data point for them. So once this kind of thing happens, that totally erodes trust. It doesn't sort of feel like that small mom and pop shop anymore. You start feeling like a number. So personalization, right? If we have data to back it, that can go a really, really long way. Another one, credit union uncovered 200 loans with members that did not have a SSN. That causes a lot to break, right? SSN is a pretty crucial field to join on, to do certain analyses on. If you don't have it, that can cause, inaccurate reporting. Also, compliance issues, of course. That's the state example that I gave in this 57 two-digit code. Credit union had over 60. Foreclosures with collateral with no flood insurance, yet they were in a flood zone. So again, financial loss, non-compliance, etc. So these are just a few examples, but we see these truly every day. And that's one of our missions, is to help, clean up that data for folks and expose where it's wrong, so that we can go and build cool stuff, conformance layers, dashboards, etc. And this is more sort of on that AI side of things, but garbage in, garbage out, right? It's all about what is powering, on the back end. So if we have bad data, on the back end, the AI is smart, but it's not smart enough to know, what's right from wrong. It's just going to see the data that we have on the back end, and if it's wrong or bad, we're out of luck. That's the unfortunate truth. So especially as we're starting to get to these more advanced models that are capable of really cool stuff, predictive modeling, anomaly detection, etc., we need to make sure that the data is all, quality assured, and is in one place, to be able to check all of that. So this sort of takes us to the next piece, which is to say we need to have data governance and we need to have data accessibility. AI tools and dashboard building, whatever stage of the process you are on or want to be on, none of it is as good as it's only as good as the data that, sort of is in the back end. So again, one of our sort of key tenets of thinking about this is to say, we have data from many, many different sources, or our CUs that we work with, data from many sources, right? Maybe it's in the LOS, maybe it's in the core. Mortgage might be somewhere else. It's in many places. So while that, even if we can get to a point where that data looks good, is clean, is vetted, etc., we still have these separate funnels, these silos of information. And so when I go to build a dashboard or I go to ask my AI chatbot, I'm only going to get it for one source at a time. It's not a single source of truth by any means. So what we have to think about is how can we put that into one place? So that's where our data model comes in. And so we think about, let's bring it all into Snowflake. That's what we use. Bring it into Snowflake. Let's make a standardized data model so that we have one standardized view, let's say VLONE, right? We're pulling in information from 3 different sources, standardizing it, so that we have it all at our fingertips, which will then allow for a very easy dashboard build, right? I'm not doing a bunch of complicated joins and Tableau prep. I have it all in one view. And eventually downstream, when you're ready for sort of these AI practical applications, we have it all in one place. So making sure that your data is in one place, ready to use, is hard. It's a hard venture. It involves engineering, pipelines, etc. But it's well worth it because without this step, we just have these siloed data sets that don't actually communicate with one another. Some other key tenets here to think about, right? Centralized data warehouse, that's what I was just mentioning. Standardized definitions is huge. You might have, 40 different tables in your core that all are pretty similar and have different field names, right? That might resonate with you. If we're not standardizing what these names and business definitions mean, then if I present this awesome dashboard to Katie that I just spent a bunch of time on, if she doesn't know what the field names are or where they were mapped from or what they mean or the definitions, then she can't trust that dashboard. That could be anything, right? What does that mean? That it could mean truly anything. So standardizing definitions, using a model that's been vetted. Again, for us, what that means is we'll pull in data at its raw form, and then we'll create this model, on top of that. That's sort of subject specific, loans, transactions, members, etc. Making sure that that's vetted and used properly. This is a big one, especially for dashboard building. Limited and trusted BI data sources. So probably resonates with you, right? Let's say you have 10 content creators in your Power BI environment, and they're all using separate CSVs local to their machine. Happens all the time because it's easy, right? You have a CSV on your machine, you want to use it. But the problem with that is I have no idea if Joe's CSV that's on his machine is correct. Where did that number come from? I don't know. Also, Joe has a definition for member, which is this, and Jerry has a definition, which is that, and they're completely different. Which one should we use? I don't know. We don't know anymore. So making sure that you have, in our case, that would be called just, one view, one VLONE that we can use. And that's been vetted, that's been tested, etc. So that we know when we're talking about number of members, we're all on the same page talking about the same thing. Data ownership and stewardship. This would apply to those data sources that you're using as well as the dashboards you create. And I'll get to this in a minute, but I think part of the sort of side effect of many people becoming, or I guess all of us becoming data superheroes, building all of this really cool stuff, is that we're going to see an explosion in content. So with that, we have to be careful, right? Is it all necessary? Should we be building all of that? Who's going to use all of that? Did anybody ask for that? Making sure that there's owners for all of these reports. And again, I'll talk about this more in a minute, but that's a start for that. Accessible documentation. How do I actually use this dashboard? What was the data source powering it, on the back end? Self-service with guardrails. This is huge too. One of the ways that our product, Arkalytics, was founded was that we worked with a CU that had, I don't know, something like 2,000 reports. Katie, is that right? 2,000 reports is a huge amount. And they said, we have so many reports. How do we minimize this? So we built what we call workbenches, which are basically just sort of self-service pivot tables in Power BI or Tableau So now end users can go in and fully self-serve whatever reports they were originally building. That might take a long time in a matter of minutes. But the guardrail to that is no, you can't edit the data on the back end. You can build whatever you want, build whatever table you want, but you're not going to delete anything. You're not going to change the data on the back end, etc. So we still have that single source of truth, working behind it. So it's basically a padded room, where you can go and experiment and practice and build things, but there's guardrails. And then of course, access, that's permissions, access, etc. That's really crucial for compliance, especially in this industry. We don't want, the wrong person getting access to a bunch of PII, social security numbers, etc. Okay, so this is what I was mentioning. I think what we're going to see, and what I've certainly seen with some credit unions I've worked with, is that there's an explosion of content incoming. And I sort of think of this as a sort of reverse or smiley face shaped bell curve, where maybe 10 years ago, there was a real emphasis put on we have 2,000 reports in Excel. How can we minimize that? Okay, here's 5 Tableau dashboards. It's going to encompass all of your 2,000 reports. Now I have less content. I think now we're getting to a point where we have people saying, I have all my data in one place, hopefully, maybe. I have a cool data model. I have a cool data source. I also have the ability through Gemini, through ChatGPT, through Microsoft Copilot to build these really epic dashboards. Let me do it. Well, now I think we're going to start moving back up that bell curve to say, well, how do we end up with 200 reports again? Our whole institutional goal was to minimize the amount of reports, but now I have a million really cool reports. Who's using them? Who's owning them? Who asked for them? And so I think requirements gathering here is going to be absolutely crucial. Sorry for the siren in the background if you can hear that. I think that requirements gathering is going to be crucial to say, okay, I can build this, but should I build it? Is it actually going to be used? And did somebody else already build it, right? Maybe I build this. Oh boy, that's a loud one. Myself. There we go. Maybe somebody else built something really, really similar. So should I actually build basically a duplicate that looks different? No, probably not, because now you have 2 sources of truth for your end users. They're not going to know which one to use. That's going to cause confusion, etc. This chart here shows you YouTube video growth since 2016, 2015. And I couldn't find one that dated back earlier, but I bet if you were to look to, 2003, it would be a pretty exponential curve of growth. And my aim here was to demonstrate that more and more with more technology, more access, more ability, just in a layperson's hands, they can create content really quickly. And that's what's happening. I mean, it would take you so many lifetimes to get through all of the videos on YouTube, in the same way that, when we can build these dashboards so quickly, so efficiently, we don't want to have a scenario where we have 500 really cool dashboards, because then what are you going to use? Again, I don't know. So that is one thing that I would caution, especially with sort of this phase that we're in of super developers because of these AI tools that I mentioned, making sure that data governance, requirements gathering, do I need to build this report? Who asked for it? Is still on the forefront of all of these builds. So are dashboards dead? No, they're not dead. They're still being used. We use them every day. But the way that people build them and the way that we engage with them as viewers are changing so rapidly. So visualizations, dashboards are certainly not dead, but they're changing. So they're changing, again, how we build them, how we interact with them. So I think the way that we can all ground ourselves in these change is to position ourselves so that we have a certain amount of data literacy, right? How can I actually understand how to use dashboards? How can I understand the data, behind a dashboard that I'm going to build to make sure that I'm showing it in a way that makes sense, that's not misleading, that's not unfair to the data. And then of course, data quality, right? We need to make sure that we're investing in time and people and resources to make sure that the data that we're building all of this cool stuff on is actually vetted, is actually true. I was on a call pretty recently with somebody who was thinking about sort of getting into these they were going to buy a pretty advanced AI tool on top of their current tech stack to build this, as that company said, build these really insane probability models, etc. Sounded great. The account executive there was really persuasive. It sounded awesome. And then I said, sounds cool. Can I look at your data just to see, maybe look for a use case? And I couldn't even piece together the simplest dashboard because it didn't make any sense and it was all over the place. So, you know, if you are finding yourself thinking about how can I get to the next step of these cool technological innovations, I think the first thing you should think about is my data in one place? Is it relatively clean? Is somebody in charge of making sure it stays clean, etc. Knowing your use case, sorry, knowing your use case, making sure that you're using the right tool for the job, right? Make sure that you have a use case for every build that you do. Be intentional. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Um, ROI here, right? Same thing. Even though it's way more efficient to build things, I could build it in 2 hours now instead of 40. Doesn't mean I should. You know, maybe it's not going to actually drive any kind of business impact that's going to help the bottom line or help your members. So why do it? Um, so making sure that even though again it's less time spent on development now, making sure that there's still a reason for it. I think those are some major takeaways. All right, that's the end. Katie, if you have anything to add, jump in. But thank you all for being here.
Well, thank you very much for you both for presenting today. We appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining the meeting. If you have any questions, please reach out. And I hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.